The comic we're talking about today is something you read a while ago.
I read it last year because I mentioned it in our 2021 wrap up as one of my favorite things I read.
I read them all last night. I shotgunned all 5 issues, and it's fantastic.
Yeah.
The Me You Love in the Dark, from writer Skottie Young and artist Jorge Corona. It's a 5-issue miniseries from Image Comics.
Isn't it so beautifully done? Art style is really important to me in comics. It doesn't matter how good the story is.
Yeah.
If I'm not vibing with the art, I don't care.
It's a visual medium.
I love the art style. I think it's so beautiful and stylized and gothic and moody. It almost felt like Tim Burton-y to me.
Yes, apparently the comparisons that they used when they were marketing it, there was some Neil Gaiman in there.
Yeah.
I think there was a bit of Stephen King. So here's the premise. Our protagonist is a painter named Ro, or Rowena, a painter who feels stuck and uninspired after a recent success. So she leaves the city and rents out a big, cool old house to focus and produce new work for an upcoming show. And we see her through the ebb and flow, the difficulties of the creative process. And she starts talking to herself because she's alone in this big house. And eventually something starts talking back. The story spirals. It becomes a love story, a ghost story, horror. It's a fantastic evolution, but only being 5 issues, it's incredibly focused and tight. I could see this, if it were a movie, it would be a 90-minute movie. There are overt comparisons you could make. I'm sure you've already thought of The Shining, and we'll talk about that later.
Sure.
But it's so much more focused than The Shining because you don't have the almost distraction or complication of the family.
Right, because it's just her.
Or the history.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of backstory and lore about about the Overlook itself.
Oh, yeah.
And about, well, especially in the book, there's a lot more of that in the book. Just about the Overlook and its history and past caretakers and stuff. This isn't quite as broad as that.
Right, and even the main character's kind of alcoholism and all these other elements.
Yeah.
Here, we don't get much about Ro beyond her writer's block or artist
painter's block. Yeah.
And I like that focus.
Yeah.
I mean, it's her, the ghost monster, whatever you want to call it, and her agent who she talks to on the phone sometimes.
Yeah.
It's incredibly controlled. And
Yeah.
it feels like almost a one-act play that distills the parts that appealed to me most out of The Shining. The most provocative bits, and just blows through them quickly and efficiently.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really well done. I will say I kind of feel like it's different because I read this issue by issue as it came out. So I read one issue a month, basically. You read it all in one go. I'd like to reread it all together and kind of see how that changes my opinion. But for me, I kind of feel like the ending is a bit rushed, and I feel like this could have worked a bit more as a 6 or 7 issue run rather than 5. I just think especially the stuff with the emotional abuse that this ends on, I think could have been built up just a bit more subtly and a bit more carefully.
I tried to sort of pause and digest after each issue because I'm at this point, a year and a half or whatever we are into reading comics, I'm also used to the monthly grind. But I do prefer reading things in a trade paperback or in a big compendium.
Yeah.
And it's not even that I have to sit there and read 48 issues in one sitting.
No.
But I like having that option.
Yeah.
Even if I pace myself with 1 or 2 a day or however much, I like having that option. I thought this was paced really well into 5 issues. That turn you're talking about in the relationship. The relationship doesn't even begin really until
3 or 4.
Yeah, 2 going into 3.
Yeah.
And then it's solidified in 3 and it turns into 4.
Yeah.
And then it's real bad in 5. And there is an evenness almost.
Yeah.
There's a balance in that progression.
No, you're right. It's thought out and it's overall it's well paced. I just think if we had maybe one more issue where we see their relationship before it gets noticeably bad, just seeing, because the thing about emotional abuse is, from what I understand, is that it builds slowly and you don't notice it until it's really bad. And so I think building that a bit more carefully might have benefited the story.
See, I understand that. And I mean, what you're saying makes sense because most arcs in comics are 6 issues. 5 is sort of irregular.
That's true, yeah.
But I liked it in 5. And I liked that they skipped over some of that because you kind of see the consummation of the relationship.
Yeah.
And then it jumps, and there's a bit of a time jump.
Yeah, I mean, I believed it. It's not like I didn't believe it. I was on board. I just would have liked a bit more.
But it means that all you learned about that relationship in that missing time was the references that the ghost made to it. And since so much of the relationship was invented or embellished in his mind, only getting his like recollections of that to her sort of made sense, because we didn't see it and it didn't exist to us. And we're seeing his like perversion of it.
Right. Well, and that's fun because it plays with the unreliable narrator, which is like a woman drinking alone in a house is like the most, like, not in a bad way, but cliche, like thriller horror trope, right? Like this unreliable female narrator. And so I think that that's fun by like skipping over a lot of that and only getting this ghost thing's perspective, who may not even exist, makes us really question what's actually happening in her own sanity and perception. So that's fun.
I think it helps to untether the story a little bit from a clean timeline, because you sort of lose track of how long she's been in the house.
Totally, yeah.
How much work she's made, how long this relationship has been going. And then when she has little realizations like, oh, I haven't been out of the house in a long time, you don't know if she's right or wrong. And I think skipping some parts of time that are important to their relationship is essential to sort of disorient the reader too.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I know what you're saying, and I've read other series that are through a more traditional publisher maybe, and they're canceled or they don't get the original run that they were planning for, so they have to rush a lot of plot in the last issue or two.
Yeah.
This didn't read like that at all for me.
Okay.
And for anyone who's going to go pick it up now, they're going to pick up the trade paperback. It's like $15, go buy it.
Yeah.
But I don't think it felt like they were crunching through a bunch of story in the last couple pages.
Okay, yeah.
I thought it read really well.
No, for sure. And it does, this thing manages to cover and explore a lot of ideas. It's not just about an abusive relationship. It's not just about isolation. It's not just about going crazy. It's not just about being an artist and struggling with that. Like, it's about all of those things together. And it's about like being inspired and not being inspired, and like possessive love, both of a person and over your own work. Like, it's about a lot of things, and I think it handles them all pretty well.
Because I was trying to avoid sort of the phrase emotional abuse, not because I don't think it happens. It certainly is sort of the climax of the story, but that isn't the full. I mean, that's like a pivot halfway through the development.
Yeah, like I wouldn't call this a story about an abusive relationship. It's a story about, I don't even know,
because you introduce all those other things. You introduce Ro and her struggle, her creative struggle, and then you introduce the ghost. You deepen that connection, and then it turns into a love story. The seduction is most of the first half of this story. Her in this kind of vulnerable, messy place, and then this sort of seduction begins, and you are skeptical of the ghost, but you sort of follow Ro's lead.
Yeah.
And once it pivots and starts to go bad, then it becomes a ghost story. You see sort of the cyclical nature of this. You remember the real estate agent saying, like, a lot of people have died or whatever in that house. And you start to see, like, oh shit, this is what happens every time someone rents out this place.
Yeah.
But the abuse is, it's more possessive.
Yes.
Right?
It's very possessive.
It's more he doesn't want her to leave.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm struggling to find the exact words here, but it's more indirect and complicated.
Yeah.
Because I think this idea could be done really clumsily.
Yeah.
And it's done with such elegance here that it defies any sort of one label. It's a relationship with a ghost going very bad.
Yeah. And the ghost thing, like, creates this almost codependent relationship for both of them, where he doesn't want her to leave because then he's all alone. Like, it seems like he can't leave the house. So he needs her, but then he creates an environment where she relies on him as someone to talk to, as like an inspiration for her work, a muse, exactly. And so it's like this, like he makes her success dependent on him and on her staying in the house, and so she can't leave.
Let me formulate that a little better than I just did.
Sure.
Abuse, maybe turning more to the term controlling. There's such a strong balance in this story of silent panels, clipped dialogue, really efficient conversations. But the thing that turns into abuse is the amount of control he has over her.
Exactly.
Because he's immaterial.
Yeah.
It becomes that he's always present or watching or observing her. And because it's a visual medium like this, we are placed in such an uncomfortably close perspective to his, watching her. And the only way that he's represented is usually through kind of hands growing out of the shadows or the darkness.
And we never really see his full character design, which I really like.
The thing that is so scary is that there are no boundaries for where he can be and what he can do, and that you don't know the extent of his abilities. So it's like abuse on a metaphysical level. It's so much more like surreal and compelling, which
I like, because I feel like that, and it's hard for me to say because I personally haven't experienced an emotionally abusive relationship, but I what I understand is that it feels all consuming and everywhere in that way. It's not just like in the physical person. It's all around you. It can completely encompass and take over your life. So I really liked that.
The metaphor works. And the thing with emotional abuse versus physical abuse is that it doesn't leave the same type of visible scars.
Well, exactly.
It's not, it doesn't, the bruises aren't as visible.
And it's harder for you to be objective about it. Yeah.
And the one of my favorite parts of this story is the way the ghost who becomes the villain of the story, the way he's rendered. Because the story, I mean, even once you see that he's a bad guy, it retains the mystery, the ambiguity, the hands growing out of the darkness. His face is so mercurial. Yeah. His features are constantly shifting and changing. It's not abstract. I mean, the art style is different for his face, but it's like his true appearance is intentionally abstracted. Yeah. To make it illogical and intangible. I mean, even when you get closer shots of him later, when he's more out in the open, it's like teeth and eyes. And the surrealism of that works. The metaphor works because Ro doesn't ever react to that. She's never afraid.
That's true. Yeah.
Of those parts. I mean, she like kisses him. When he looks like that, she doesn't even react to that appearance.
Right. Yeah. So it's almost like, does she even see that? Is she like so just like abused and going a bit insane that she can't see what he actually is and what he looks like? It's really cool.
Or just her not seeing the truth of him. Is there a truth of him? I mean, it's going back to like the conversation we used to have about like Disney movies. Like, well, if the character, I mean, like in the 90s, like if the character is drawn ugly, it means they're a bad guy.
Yeah, right.
If you keep shifting their appearance, and even the scary shit no one reacts to, you lose all of those signposts for who's good and bad. Totally. And then it's just this wondrous thing. It reminds me of that manga adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft that I read.
Oh, cool.
At the Mountains of Madness.
That's fun.
It has that same... It's illogical. You don't know how to process it, so there's just wonder.
That's cool.
Instead of a straight surrealism in the villain, it develops this sense of stillness that is so much more fascinating and fearful to watch. And because we get to know this character before we even see the kind of Shelob style slow reveal of his physical features. Yeah. Before we get any of those, we just get dialogue. And all those qualities apply so well to disembodied dialogue. He has this emotionless, powerful aura before we see any of the scary teeth, eyes stuff.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
The development of the villain is incredible.
It is very, very impressive. I like that you keep bringing up all the hands, that you see his hands a lot, because you see a lot of Ro's hands too. Yeah. When I was kind of flipping back through images of this to remind myself, I realized there are so many just panels that are either solely of hands or are just very much focused on hands. Her grabbing paintbrushes, her holding the glass of wine, him reaching over and like trying to touch her, and like there's so much with hands, and the hands are so like beautifully like skeletal and Tim Burton-y, which is really fun. But it obviously like makes you think about like the artist and creativity and authorship and that sort of thing. And I like that this story is very much a flipping of the like it's basically a gender bend on the alluring like femme fatale muse with like the brooding male artist. Like it switches that, but it still makes the like emotionally possessive and abusive person is the muse. So it's still the man.
Right.
It's really interesting. I really like the way that they're playing with that.
And like you said, you keep talking about the art being so stylized and skewed. I thought that was gorgeous and kind of, I think it really sold an already great script even more. Yes. It elevates everything.
It's perfect.
And you keep talking about the hands and how they're sort of squared off and elongated. I'm not going to call it Tim Burton. That feels reductive.
No, I just mean it's hard to describe art if you can't see it. So
no, I know. Yeah. But so many of the panels are so fragmented of an individual feature or item that it lets this artist, who's so talented, indulge in the fun bits. You get things like the candles all look like sculptures. It's always the wax piling up and dripping.
Yeah.
But it's not just that. They're all gnarled and sideways. The flames are huge. It's got thick kind of black contouring to show the drips of the wax so you can't miss them.
Yeah.
It's so fun to look at. And even the first time we see Ro at her canvas, the panel showing her, so we're seeing her from behind. She's on her little stool. She's got the canvas and she's in front of a mirror. Not a mirror, a window. That panel is as tall as the page, but incredibly narrow.
Yes.
It's rare for panels to be as tall as the page, right?
Yes.
So that's already striking, but the narrowness of it, it's emphasizing scale, but with restraint. Because it's so tall, and you get sort of the impossibly tall ceiling and windows. No one has a window that's 8 feet tall.
Right.
But it's also feeding into sort of that fantasy of having that much time and open space to create.
And all that natural light. Exactly.
Right. And
because this is like an incredibly impractical, unrealistic situation that a painter is going to find themselves in.
Well, it's not, because the premise is that she makes really accessible, nice, kind of fluffy, just blocks of color that are pleasing artwork, and that has gotten really successful.
Yeah.
I was initially agreeing with you. The first issue, I was like, how the fuck can she afford this house?
Yeah.
But they did, by making her have that like very agreeable art that businesses could hang in the lobby.
That's fair.
It could become this sort of easy status symbol that everyone would want. It's like the most mainstream thing.
Yeah.
That's why the agent is so horrified by the new stuff she's making.
That's true. Yeah. And I didn't mean that as a critique of this. I just like that it's sort of playing with a fantasy. Every creator wants to be able to go buy a nice old house and only focus on their work in total isolation. Every creator wants that. And so then it's like playing with how horribly wrong that could go.
And I think one of the calls with the agent, I think, illuminated this, because I was distracted by this idea while I was reading it. Yeah. And one of the calls with the agent, he almost teases her like, if you don't have anything for the show, you don't have any shows, you go back to working in a coffee house. And I think she has that fear, and that's what sort of adds tension to the painter's block that she's going through. But it's also guilt because it's set in the modern day, and I think she's used to not having that much money.
Yeah,
where she's putting that much pressure on herself that she already persuaded them to pay for the house, to let her do this. She doesn't even want to make the stuff that was successful. There is that guilt and discomfort kind of coded throughout her character, and that helped me come to terms with it. Because so much of this does appeal to that very natural desire that almost everyone has in one medium or another to do something creative or artistic. Whether it's playing an instrument or painting or writing or drawing or whatever it is, everyone has some sort of interest in something like that. And to have success, that's already gigantic. But to then
what a luxury.
But to then have all these added luxuries and to see the pressure and the guilt and the sort of isolation that brings is a fascinating way to start this story that could otherwise feel so familiar. Jack Torrance is not a successful writer.
Right.
It's a great way to shake up that formula.
Totally.
That is still so universal. And the Shining thing, yes, it's an isolated, frustrated, creative person going crazy in a big house. But when the agent shows up and visits, because she won't return his phone calls, he drops a reference to The Shining.
That's right. Yeah.
Did you
I forgot about. Yeah, I just forgot about it
because it's very cold outside.
Yeah.
And he makes a reference about Nicholson at the end of The Shining.
Yeah.
And then something happens that immediately echoes something that happens to a character in The Shining. And I felt like that was I mean, I'm used to stories nodding to their inspiration or their sort of comp titles, but this felt like a stern handshake.
Yeah, it was.
Thanks, Stephen.
Well, and it was just of course, this is like, you're going to make this comparison. I have to acknowledge it and address it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And even more than that, like throughout this story, Ro is the only one who ever sees the ghost.
Well, exactly. I think that's one of my favorite parts of this is, and I think most, if not all, good horror does this, is you can imagine a scenario where all this is happening in the character's head, like that none of it's real. Especially because, like you talked about, she's not afraid of the creepy parts of him, and like that would be like objectively terrifying to anybody looking at him, and no one else sees him. And it makes sense if she's alone, talking to herself, drinking a lot in this house. And so I really like that we're unclear if it really happens or not.
But also the impetus for creativity, the inspiration or the flow state that does the work of creating the thing. All that starts in your head too. All of that is illogical and intangible and surreal.
And made up.
Yes.
Especially if you're like writing a story. You're making up something in your head that hasn't happened.
And that isolation, I mean, there is a craziness to it. You're seeing how far you can go into your own head to finish a project.
Yes.
And then the trick is always the day after. Because you have to find more ideas.
Yes.
More stuff to do. And that is like this endlessly inward spiral.
Yeah, and the losing track of time, how long have I been inside this house? It all makes a lot of sense.
But if we're already sort of side-eyeing the story because of the just money of buying the house, like those sort of meat and potatoes concerns, this story could easily be very eye-rolly or cringy.
Sure.
If it really leans into how troubled and delicate and dainty it is to be an artiste.
Exactly. But I know, exactly. I was so impressed that it didn't feel like that.
But even the shots of her creative process and struggle are so controlled and interesting. Because it's a very human frustration. It's not elevated and self-important. It's her sitting in front of it. She tries scratching out some things. She's like, draw, stupid. You've done this every day. Why can't you make this happen?
Yeah.
It's
not her saying, I need to find my inspiration.
Right.
You know? Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't get the impression even the wine is expensive. This is like
Trader
Joe's style. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's never boring. It's never indulgent. It feels true. It's never repetitive. You get these gorgeous stylized close-ups of brushes, strokes on the canvas. I loved seeing how the artist rendered paint.
I know.
I've never seen
paint
beautiful drawn.
I know.
Like, you know?
I feel like we didn't really see many of her finished paintings.
No.
Because that was not at all the point of the story.
Because even those sort of inoffensive color block ones she got successful on, you only see those in the background of a faded out panel.
Yeah.
It's nothing close up.
Yeah. The point of the story isn't, look what she made, look what she was able to accomplish. It's not about that at all.
And so much of how the creative process is rendered here comes down to color. And if we're talking about the line work, the hands, the body, her feet are incredibly small and narrow, like her legs are that's the sort of Tim Burton-y thing maybe you were talking about.
I just mean like the sharp Gothic stylization.
Yeah, but there's also a spindly nature to it.
Yeah.
And by contrast, the color is incredibly naturalistic, which for me, I mean, I love a stylized art style as far as line work goes. I love that. Yeah. But the color being naturalistic really immersed me in the story. So much of this color palette is changed by the day-night cycle and the color that bleeds through these massive windows, the way light spills into the room, the way darkness almost devours the entire setting.
Yes, and the whole thing is that he can only be there when it's dark. So like he can't be in this like well-lit room.
Right. So if you're Ghost, who is he's not the villain for most of the story. He's
right.
He starts off as this, I don't know, supernatural object. He becomes a curiosity, then he becomes a love interest. And then eventually he becomes a villain.
Yeah.
But if you just have your other character, if you're simplifying it down to there are two characters in the story.
Yeah.
If half of your cast exists in the shadows, then the reader becomes interested in every corner and crevice
Absolutely.
of every room.
I was always looking for him to see if his if a hand was there or an eye or a tooth.
And it wasn't like a Where's Waldo. It was a genuine, like you wanted to see him. You wanted him to be present. You wanted them to be closer.
I was gonna say, especially because he's not a villain at first. Like, you're a little creeped out because he's a ghost, but like I was not anticipating him becoming what he becomes.
Right.
And so I was like, this is kind of cool. This is really interesting. I want to see more of him. I want her to have a friend.
There's nothing lazy, tropey, boring, eye roll about the evolution of his character. It feels so fresh, even if you can compare it to 40 other things.
Well, right. Like, that's what's so cool about this story is that it plays with so many tropes. I'm sorry, I can tell I interrupted you. I'll get back. I have more tropes to talk about. You go.
I just wanted to highlight the way Corona shades this story is with almost all black. It's not shades of gray. He uses all black, so things are just purely in shadow. And if the ghost exists in that pure black space, then he really can be almost everywhere on every page. And he closes the curtains and all that to give himself kind of more space to fill. But the masterstroke of this story is that we don't fear the ghost in the shadows. While the love story part is progressing, the totality of shadow, the ever-presence of shadow in the house becomes intimacy for these characters. Yeah. It becomes a flirtation where at one point she's working in this empty room that's in the dark and she just has a candle. So he's all around her.
Right. So that he can be there with her.
Yeah, and there develops this sexuality in the darkness, which is just fascinating. I've never seen something like it, and it works so perfectly in a comic.
Yeah.
The last point on coloring was the teal. There's this very strange blue-green. Teal is the word, but that's almost not what I want to call the color. It's a really unique blend of those two shades, and it's this unsettled, unreal color that doesn't really show up in nature or anywhere else.
Where do you see that color?
In the ghost's eyes.
Okay, yeah.
But also in Rose glasses, which have that thick sort of Coke bottle color.
Yeah, you can't even see her actual eyeballs. You only see her glasses.
And if she's the only one who ever interacts with the ghost, that's a beautiful way to show that only she is seeing him.
Yes.
If that color is blocking out her eyes and present in his.
Totally.
It's a great way of it's not even it's more coding that representation and that unity, the connection between the muse and the artist.
Totally.
It's all of it is just so perfectly done.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's short, that it's not 12 issues or whatever, or an ongoing or whatever, means that it's a complete and perfect product.
Yeah, there's nothing else.
It's just the story is so satisfying. I just loved this.
And no, it's cool because it's playing with so many tropes, but also being so unique in its execution. Like, it plays with the artist muse thing. You talked about that already. It plays with the isolated artist going mad, blah, blah, blah. But it's also playing specifically with the woman trapped in a house slowly going insane. I mean, you see that in, 19th century, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman.
Oh, sure.
That's a woman who is forced to stay in a room because she is depressed. And they're like, I know how to fix you. We'll just lock you in the attic. And then she literally goes insane. It's a really great story. And then, more recently you've got Otessa Moshfegh's My Year of Rest and Relaxation. And I think that's a trope and a theme that is becoming a lot more popular. It's the unhinged woman thing that a lot of people on TikTok like to read now. Or that people on TikTok talk about it because they've been reading it. Anyway.
But also we can all relate to the isolation locked up thing.
Exactly. Right. So it's playing with all of these tropes, but like you're saying, executing it in this beautifully unique and fresh way. I really, really liked this. Yeah. Again, I think I would have liked, one more issue just to play out the relationship a little bit more, because it's a really big climax at the end. It doesn't quite feel earned, but maybe it feels different if I read it all in one go.
I had no complaints.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have anything else in this. I really, really loved it. I thought it was so much fun.
Huge recommendation. Absolutely. And if you did check it out, let us know what you thought. Yeah. secondbreakfastpod@gmail.com, also on Instagram. So.
And I will say, if you've read other comics that are similar to The Me You Love in the Dark, please tell me, because I want to read all of them, because that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Thanks,
See you
everyone.
Friday.
Bye.